Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. I'm glad you can join us. I guarantee you'll have an opinion on everything we're going to talk about today. A Florida jury now has the case against George Zimmerman. Will he be held legally responsible for the death of teenager Trayvon Martin? Do you see anything wrong with the guards at the Gogebic site up north wearing camouflage and carrying military-style rifles? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And we'll talk about the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors trying to dictate what a hotel pays its employees. All right, let me introduce everybody. We have longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Callaway, communications and public relations professional. And Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about the George Zimmerman trial. As of this taping Friday evening, his fate is in the hands of a Florida jury. The jury will decide if he's guilty of murder, guilty of manslaughter, or not guilty of anything. Is there public pressure on this jury to hold Zimmerman legally responsible for the death of Trayvon Martin, whether he's guilty or not?
Well, I think he's guilty, but I'm not on the jury. I think he's certainly guilty of manslaughter. This case is, it's swung back and forth. And I think from the very beginning, people's perceptions of what had taken place have been shaped by what the media had presented to them through their lens. And unfortunately, by the time it has reached a jury, even with the television broadcast of the trial having taken place, and for those who watched, having had the opportunity to make up their minds as to whether they thought Zimmerman was guilty or not, I think there's still in the back of the minds of most those initial reactions to what had been presented to them, and I'm one of those folk. I just think it's very difficult to appreciate Zimmerman's standpoint that his life was threatened when he put himself in the position of having his life threatened. And then ultimately you had a needless death occur as a result of his actions, those things that he precipitated that led to the death.
Denise, was it proper for the President of the United States, when this all originally happened, to weigh in and say, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon?
I think what the President was doing at that point in time was reacting as so many people did, particularly people of color, when it came to this circumstance where you had this unarmed teenager who was pleading for his life and gunned down. And his response was not, I'll tell you, it's what other people who are people of color around this country were thinking. That looks like my son. That could have been my nephew. That could have been my grandchild. So I think it was absolutely appropriate, as he didn't weigh in and say that Zimmerman was guilty or wasn't guilty. He stated a fact that is absolutely clear to people of color all over the country, and that is that that young man, in far too many American cities, on any given day, could have been one of our young men, a young man who's connected to us. Gerard's absolutely right. George Zimmerman put himself in the situation that he's in. He decided that he was going to be an armed watch person for his neighborhood. He decided that after he called the police and he told the police what had happened, what he suspected was happening, and the police said to him, "Are you following him?" And the police told him not to do it. He continued to do it anyway. At one point in time in his stalking and pursuit of Trayvon Martin, he lost Trayvon Martin, but didn't break off from his pursuit of him then. He just went and found him again, and that's when this horrible incident happened where this young man was murdered. And that's what it is. It's murder. He had a gun. And one of the things that people will tell you when you undergo training for weapons is they'll say, if you have this gun and you take this gun, you better be prepared to use it every time you pull it out of its holster or its safe spot.
Kevin, if the jury decides he is not guilty, that he is not legally responsible for the death of Trayvon Martin, do you worry that there'll be a public uproar in Florida?
I do, but if it does happen, it's because who put that idea into people's minds? The mass media and law enforcement, who are making all these wild and crazy preparations, assuming that, cities are going to go up in flames. That would be horrendous, of course. But it is a possibility, I guess, and that's too bad. I want to respond to some of the things that have been said here. I think that he is not George Zimmerman is not guilty of the crime he is accused of, and that he will be exonerated for two reasons. One, he's innocent, and number two, the prosecution has just put forth a shabby, horrible case and has not proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed murder. Hindsight, should he have followed Trayvon? Probably not. But that doesn't make him a murderer. And I don't know of many assassins that call the police before they perform an assassination. The evidence, to me at least, is clear that Trayvon Martin, and according to the testimony, was on top of George Zimmerman and was banging his head into the ground. Trayvon didn't get the broken nose. Trayvon didn't have lacerations on the back of his head. It was George Zimmerman who was fighting for his life, and I think eventually that is what the jury is going to find. And I think the other tragedy here is that there is a faction that was trying to use this incident, which is the most overhyped news story in America so far this year, as the definitive case study of what's wrong in contemporary America, that this is a nation of rank racism and race relations haven't improved one single bit since the 1950s in Mississippi. I think this was the wrong case to pick because that hasn't been the situation at all.
The state's attorney is not supposed to bring a charge unless they're pretty comfortable that they can get a conviction. Do you worry that they did not bring this charge for a long period of time after the incident?
Well, we all should worry because, as has been described here, it was a pretty clear incident. I mean, no one. Let's go back. Let's go back before. No, they might. I'll tell you what they felt, and it's the reason why charges weren't brought until a public uproar was brought. This was a. No one has claimed, including George Zimmerman, has claimed that Trayvon Martin did anything to bring this on himself. That, in fact, the only thing he was seen to do was to be in a white neighborhood as a young black man. And as a matter of fact, he belonged in that neighborhood because his father was a guest in a home in that neighborhood, and he had gone to buy some candy and was going back to where his father was staying. And the only reason George Zimmerman followed him and had the gun and continued to follow him after the police told him to stop following him was because he was a young black man in a white neighborhood. And of course that's an example of what's going on in America. This young man who had not done anything, and no one has ever claimed that he's done anything to draw that attention to himself except be a young black man. And then he ends up dead. You know, Kevin, I'm sorry, said, you know, Trayvon Martin wasn't the one that had his head hit on cement. No, Trayvon Martin is the one that got killed. He's the one that's dead. And the one that's alive is the man with the gun. And the man with the gun, the one who had the deadly weapon, is the one who claimed he was worried for his life. Well, he didn't lose his life. The unarmed teenager did, who had done nothing.
Well, his bag of Skittles must have been a deadly weapon in George Zimmerman's mind, right?
It's an outrageous case, and I'm also outraged just by the reaction to the trial, because it is people choosing up sides based on their own political prejudices, their own race, or whether they have any sympathy at all for another race.
All right, next topic. More controversy at the Gogebic mine site in northern Wisconsin. The company has temporarily pulled the tough-looking security guards with their semi-automatic military-style rifles. The security firm didn't have the proper state licenses. Now, some people are criticizing the company for using imposing-looking security guards, but Kevin, isn't that the whole point of having security guards to begin with?
Especially when you have eco-terrorist goons harassing, threatening, intimidating the workers. I mean, who wouldn't want, if they had friends or family members working at this legitimate business, to be protected? And the security guards were brought in after protesters submerged on the scene. And Yeah, this is a technicality. They'll get their license and they'll be back there. And I don't care what they're wearing. I don't care what they're brandishing. I'm just glad they're there so that honest people can go to work safely and that a business can operate safely. And you've even had some people who initially, okay, criticized the fact that guards were out there after seeing video posted on Facebook by one of the protesters basically bragging about what they were doing in their masks and scarves covering their faces. Now they're going back on their criticism of the guards being placed there. They're saying that maybe it's not such a bad idea that they're there. And so I don't have a problem with armed guards being there as long as you, again, are going to have, and I repeat, eco-terrorist goons harassing, threatening, intimidating hardworking people.
Do you have any problem with the company trying to protect their, what could turn out to be a multi-billion-dollar investment?
I don't have any problem with anyone protecting themselves, but I do have a problem with the way that a small fraction of people who have taken action that I think we would all agree is inappropriate have been now painted as the protesters. This is a very small group of people. No one supports any kind of violence happening in that mine. But right now, if you take a look at the pictures that have come out of there, it would seem the biggest threat would be these heavily armed, masked guards who, as we now have discovered, don't have the proper licenses in the state of Wisconsin. To me, the last time I checked, Iron County still did have a sheriff's department. And one of the things that we charge law enforcement with doing is upholding the law. In this country, in this state, our process is that if someone breaks the law, the appropriate way for that to be handled is for law enforcement to intervene and to mete out appropriate penalties and justice. That's the way it works in this country. In this country, we don't have private companies who have taken a lot of heat for their past practices and past behaviors and other states when it comes to mining, now deciding the way they're going to shut down any protest is to have armed guards. That is not appropriate in this state. It is not appropriate in this country. You cannot decide that you're going to use a small number of people who've behaved inappropriately, and we'd all agree with that, to represent the large number of people who are protesting peacefully and who are taking appropriate channels to fight this legally. That is not what is going on up there. You have a small group of people who are doing it. Just today, the head of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, came out and said it is absolutely inappropriate for this type of action to be going on. We need to continue the peaceful protests that we have. But for people who are peacefully protesting, because that is what has happened, you have had people who are peacefully protesting who've been confronted by these armed masked guards who, quite frankly, look like they're coming out of a war zone rather than the north woods of Wisconsin. Let law enforcement do its job and back off these other folks.
If you go to a concert at Summerfest, you see big, tough-looking security guards, and the purpose is to intimidate anybody before problems are caused. Isn't that the same thing here?
They're big guys, but they're unarmed. They don't have big guns, you know, that look like cannons. And frankly, when I saw those pictures, I thought these guys must be some of those, you know, people guarding marijuana fields up there, not a legitimate, you know, project that the state of Wisconsin has endorsed. Denise is absolutely right. When Kevin denounces, you know, people who are protesting peacefully in America, which is a right, as
not peaceful
eco-terrorist goons. We all know that there's a very small group of people in this country who get involved in causing real damage to property over some of these environmental issues. There are far more people who are up there organizing hikes through the area to show people what they were going to lose if Wisconsin allows this company to haul, you know, this entire mountain away. You know, a beautiful environmental area that not only, if the project goes forward, is going to lose a lot of beautiful landscape in Wisconsin, but is going to threaten the water in the rivers and the lakes in that area. And that's a legitimate thing to protest. And those, you don't need to call those people terrorists for objecting to that. And you don't need to aim enormous weapons at them that don't even, for a security force that doesn't even, isn't even legally licensed to operate in this state.
But the state legislature and the state governor has given this company permission to pursue this project. Doesn't the company have the right to protect their project?
Yes. I don't have a problem with people exercising their right to free speech, peaceful free speech, certainly. When that becomes a threat to a company's opportunity to do business, then it's problematic. We see armed guards at businesses all over this city, let alone at that site in Gogebic. What you have, I think, is a tension between those who are certainly not anxious to see this happen and the company wanting to speed up its process to move this project forward. And so it's a stall tactic. There are those that, just as when you had these protests that were occurring whenever international organizations come into town, particularly international economic organizations, come into major cities, there's an opportunity there to disrupt their proceedings so that they can get some attention. I think this is an attention getter. And unfortunately, what's happened is that the protests have become so vile that they haven't attracted too many people to their side because the message has been spoiled by its presentation.
All right, we move on. I'd like to talk for just a few minutes about this attempt by the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors to dictate the wages paid by a company that wants to build a hotel on the old county grounds in Wauwatosa. Now they call it Innovation Park. First, the board said, we want you to pay the hotel employees at least $12.50 an hour, not the $8 or $9 that you want to pay them. Well, County Executive Chris Abele, he vetoes the measure. The board fails to override his veto by just one vote. So it looks like the hotel will win this battle when the matter comes up for a final vote later this month. Should politicians have any say at all in what any employer wants to pay his employees as long as it's above the legal minimum wage?
I think this is going to be one of the big political questions in the next decade. And I think it should be. What has happened in this country over the last 30 or 40 years, this isn't just something since Scott Walker took over or anything else, is the middle class in America can work full-time at jobs. Poor people can work more than full-time at 2 or 3 jobs and not make enough money to feed their families. The shrinking middle class, it used to be you worked at middle class manufacturing jobs and you could buy a home, you could send your kids to college, you could borrow money on that home for your retirement. There was a path to prosperity for ordinary working Americans. And in the past 30 or 40 years, the people at the very top, the top 1%, have multiplied their fortunes vastly, while the middle class can work full-time and not earn enough money to make a living. Here is an example where the county had control over a project and is simply saying, pay a livable wage. And politicians, of course, don't usually listen to ordinary people. The county board did in this case. The county executive didn't. He sided with, management, which says we can pay people, desperate people, as little as we can possibly pay them, and it's okay because they're going to be desperate and they're going to take the jobs, but they can work full-time and still not get out of poverty. And politics has to address this income inequality. It's going to be the major issue.
But Denise, if I run a store, if I want to run a restaurant, if I run a hotel, my objective is to make money, isn't it? My objective isn't to make sure that the dishwasher and the waitress can buy a house and buy a car.
No, but I think it is our objective to make sure that these same people we hire are able to, quite frankly, take advantage of the products that we produce and that they're helping to support.
Good economics.
It is. So, I mean, do you want somebody who makes so little that they can't take advantage of and buy the very products that they're producing and selling? I think what makes this different is that we're not talking about somebody who's, purchased a piece of land at 52nd and Brown Deer. We're talking about county-owned land. And I think that the county board had the right idea, but probably went about it the wrong way. This is the kind of thing you negotiate with somebody during the contract process. You don't just decide you're going to impose it upon them at the end of the deal. So I think that I would agree with Joel. We are seeing such an erosion of the middle class, such a growing gap between people who have and those who have not, that to an extent the county, as a representative of all citizens of this community, has a responsibility to say, we have this very valuable piece of land. We're going to let someone come in here and do something with it. That's good for them, but how do we make sure that it's also something that's good for citizens of this community? Right idea, bad way to do it.
But it kind of complicates matters when the hotel company says, listen, we'll pay them $8 or $9 an hour, or we're not going to build a hotel.
Well, this project has had so many twists and turns, it's unbelievable. At one point, it was on life support until Lee Holloway had resurrected it prior to his departure. Then the hotel project itself, which was an addition long after, I'd say substantially after, maybe not long after, substantially after that initial contracting period was consummated. Denise, you're right. There is a common purpose that the county board, I think, was trying to protect. They just didn't articulate it well, and that is those grounds had been out there primarily for county operations. Over time, they've morphed into having tenants that have long-term leases. They have some commitment to providing county services or services to the broader community, but they don't necessarily, they haven't necessarily been profit-making operations. Now you're looking at profit-making concerns being out on those grounds, and so the board, I think, was looking at how can they then influence these county grounds if they're going to benefit profit-making organizations.
Do we leave it to the market to set the wages?
Yes. Your original question to open the topic was, should politicians get involved in trying to convince or persuade businesses to set wages? No. I don't want politicians who have never run a business telling people who do run businesses how to run their business. And when you try to set wages that are above what they should be, what happens? You have fewer job openings, you fill fewer jobs with employees, or worst case scenario, the business says, I'm not going to work under these parameters. It's very disturbing to me that we have a community that is always screaming, where are the jobs? Where are the jobs? We need jobs. And then when we have an opportunity to create jobs, we step all over ourselves and ruin the deal.
It's interesting where you said that government doesn't have a role in helping to set wages. But if we take a look at what happened in the Wisconsin State Legislature 2 years ago, that is precisely what happened. The legislature stepped in and did exactly that.
All right. Well, it was a private ceremony, no cameras, no speeches, on the Friday of a holiday weekend. But when it was over, Governor Walker had signed into law strict new rules and restrictions on abortions here in Wisconsin. Rick Horowitz wonders why officials here and in other states are suddenly so publicity shy. After all, he says, they're only trying to help. Rick.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one in your state legislature, and I'm all about protecting women's health. So are my fellow Republicans here in the legislature. We're all about protecting women's health. That's why we've been busy passing new laws that make it harder for women to get the abortions they're trying to get. In some places, we're making it practically impossible. We're instituting tough new regulations that'll shut down the clinics that perform abortions. And for those few clinics that are left, we're making sure women have the chance to make an informed choice. So before you make a decision, or even if you think you've already made one, we make you jump through hoops. We insist that you have an ultrasound, for instance, whether you think you need one or not, whether your doctor thinks you need one or not. And then we insist that you look at the results of the ultrasound, or at least have one of our doctors tell you exactly what he's looking at, every little bit of it, just to make sure you're making an informed choice. An informed choice meaning, of course, the choice we'd make, the choice we want you to make. Are we making you jump through hoops to exercise your rights? Absolutely. But jumping through hoops is good exercise too, good for your health. And did I mention this? We're all about protecting women's health. In fact, that's why we're closing down the clinics that don't meet hospital surgical standards and insisting that docs who provide abortions have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. Because you never know when something might go wrong, when there might be an emergency that puts a woman's health in jeopardy. Now, something might go wrong even after the abortion, even once you're on your way home or days later. So we want the medical community, in fact, your entire community, to be on alert and to stay on alert, which is why we're working on one more new common sense regulation. Any woman who decides to go ahead with an abortion will have the letter A tattooed on her forehead, a big capital A in permanent ink. A for alert, in a nice, bright, bold color, maybe a nice scarlet. We figure it's the least we can do. After all, we're all about protecting women's health.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of what looks to be a beautiful weekend.